I've just got done with Final Fantasy 3 out of 6 in the Pixel Remastered collection, but before we talk about Final Fantasy 3, I just want to shout out you guys one more time because this Platinum series has been a pleasure when it comes to the comment section, because you guys have been living in the nostalgia with me. We have been reminiscing, we've been talking about the good, the bad, the ugly, the Final Fantasy 1, the Final Fantasy 2 video, we've been sharing tips to one another, and overall it's just been a pleasure to go through. So let's keep it up for the Final Fantasy 3 video. With that all being said, what is up guys, Genesis 7 here, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel. Final Fantasy 3, the Platinum has been obtained. Now, as always, I've got you covered with timestamps in the description box below, so if there's a certain section you want to skip to, you are more than welcome. If you're wanting to speed up the video, you are more than welcome. All I ask is for you to support the channel by liking the video, subscribing to the channel if you like the content, hitting that notification bell so you are notified of that content, and of course the comment section below. Final Fantasy 3, as always, I'm going to talk to you about my history of the game before we go into the game itself. Then we'll talk about the Pixel Remaster, then we'll talk about the trophies. So, my journey with Final Fantasy 3 began on all things the PlayStation Vita. So I went on the PlayStation Store, and I think Final Fantasy 3, the PSP version, was on offer. And obviously I discovered that I can play some select PSP titles on the Vita, and I'd never played Final Fantasy 3. So hey presto, I played Final Fantasy 3 on the Vita, and in a nutshell, it was an alright experience, especially with the job system, which I absolutely love, and I'm sure you guys, as we go through this series and beyond, will see that love for the job system. But yeah, in a nutshell, Final Fantasy 3, great game, but it was the 3D version. I've never played the 2D version. We were never blessed with it here in the West until the Pixel Remaster. So Final Fantasy 3, the evolution of the series continues, and I feel like Final Fantasy 3 certainly took the best of 1 in its job system, and it took the best of 2, which was its story and its world, and kind of crumpled it together, threw it at us, and we got Final Fantasy 3. So let's start off with the story. The story is very reminiscent of Final Fantasy 1 because it's reintroducing the 4 crystals, and that is kind of like a main point of the story, and you are playing as 4 warriors of light. Though they got named in the 3D version, they are nameless Onion Knights in the 2D version, but it still has more of a story, especially when it comes to your characters as well, or your main character, than Final Fantasy 1. This is because your main character gets to speak. Wherever you see text that's in blue, you are speaking to the people, and that is a nice little touch and a step above Final Fantasy 1 in that regards. But the story definitely has an overarching narrative, and it's definitely a good one at that. Now, much like Final Fantasy 2, we get side characters, and they join your party, but they're not necessarily with you in battle. They are just there for a certain part of the story. They'll do their thing, and then they'll move on. You can talk to them by pressing the L2 button if you need some tips, because you can get easily lost in Final Fantasy 3. And apart from that, there is a good cast of characters that support you on this journey, and that's all good in my book. But I want to touch on the job system because I am a big fan of the job system, and it definitely took a step up from what was offered in Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 3. We have the ones that we had in Final Fantasy 1, so the warrior, black mage, white mage, red mage, thief, and monk. But then some more. As you progress the story, you unlock more, and it gives you a lot of options. So let's go through those jobs that are offered in Final Fantasy 3. We have the Onion Knight, we have the warrior, the monk, the white mage, red mage, black mage, and thief, as mentioned just before. But then we have the ranger, we have the knight, we have the scholar, we have the geomancer, we have the dragoon, the viking, the dark knight, the evoker, the bard, the black belt, the devout, the magus, the summoner, the sage, and the ninja. So quite a plethora of jobs there for you to mess around with, especially once you've collected them all and you're heading towards the end game. There is a lot for you to experiment with, and some people love certain jobs, some people don't love certain jobs, but me, I wanted to do my due diligence and I gave each job a try to see if it helped me in the situation I was, and there are some shining stars amongst there that we all can agree with when it comes to Ninja. Dragoon can definitely help us out in some sticky situations around the mid game. Can't go wrong with your Black Mage and White Mage. I use Dark Knight for Blade Blitz. If you know, you know, those respawning enemies can be quite frustrating, but there are a plethora of jobs to choose from and it caters to your own playstyle. My ending jobs were Ninja, I had the Thief, I had the Sage, and I had Dragoon. And that helped me out tremendously as I went through that final dungeon. You'll have to let me know what your final lineup of jobs were in the comment section down below. We will go into more detail with the job system when we talk about the combat, but we'll move on to this brand new world that's introduced in Final Fantasy III. And one thing I like about Final Fantasy III is you start off on the floating continent, and after that you realize that there's a whole other world, like it's just part of the world that you are. You look at the world map and you think this is quite small. There's only a few locations here and there, and then boom, you go off the floating continent, and even though it starts off as just water out there, you do a few things and there we go, we have an excellent world to traverse. And with this bigger world, we have more means to get around. We start off with an airship very early on, though it can't go over mountains. I remember when I first played Final Fantasy III and I was like, I've got the airship already, I can go anywhere. But I really couldn't because we can't go over mountains. But then we get a ship, and then we get another airship, and then we can get an airship that turns into a ship, and then we can get another airship that's even bigger and can do some funky jumping over mountains, but only a certain distance. And then we get an airship that can then go underwater and turn into a submarine. It is absolute madness when it comes to these vehicles, and it ties into a few gimmicks of the game, which we'll go to in a little bit. But there we go, we have a world to explore, a new big world to explore, and many ways to do it. And to be fair, it's probably my favourite Final Fantasy world yet as we're going through this Platinum series. Of course, in this world you have your towns, but more importantly, dungeons. Final Fantasy II dungeons were not great. It was definitely like a low level thing for me. Definitely something I didn't like about Final Fantasy II. I'm pleased to note that Final Fantasy III is much better in its dungeon layout and its encounter rate, which is a double thumbs up from me, because I remember how hellacious it was getting through Final Fantasy II to complete that bestiary and kind of going through all these dungeons to empty rooms and nothing there. There's less of that here, but there are a few other gimmicks that accompany that as well. Another thing introduced into Final Fantasy III was hidden items. Now, you may go into a house, and in Final Fantasy I or II, you would have never paid attention to that empty pot. But in Final Fantasy III, you might want to pay attention because there might be an item in there, and especially if you are trophy hunting, you are going to be wanting to check anywhere and everywhere. A bookcase, a desk, a patch of grass, it can be everywhere. It's something that's introduced but can be quite helpful when we talk about the Pixel Remaster editions. And as well as the hidden items, we have a lot of hidden passageways. But another good thing that the Pixel Remaster does, as soon as you enter that hidden passageway, it will be highlighted on your map, so you can go into the map, have a look, see where it is, because in Final Fantasy III Vanilla there's a lot of twists and turns that are going to get you confused and you can be very lost, run into many encounters, and it can be quite frustrating. All of that is eliminated, of course, in the Pixel Remaster. I've got to shout out the final dungeon. I think that the final dungeon of Final Fantasy III is one of the best final dungeons in a Final Fantasy game. The atmosphere, the music, the pressure build up to really kind of test to see if you are the right level or have the right strategy going towards the final boss. It's real intense, and I definitely had a few lessons learned as I went through that final dungeon, and I've just got to give kudos to it because I think it's fantastic. The last few pieces of music for Final Fantasy III are just absolute bangers. And speaking of bangers, let's talk about the whole soundtrack. Now, Final Fantasy III is definitely one of my favorite soundtracks. I definitely reminisced a lot because the Crystal Tower I first experienced in Final Fantasy XIV, and hearing it here is an absolute dream. Either the 8-bit version or the reorchestral version for the Pixel Remaster. It is a great soundtrack, and I think it needs its own shout out in this video because it's one of the best Final Fantasy tracks out there. Now, before we move on to the combat of Final Fantasy III, I just want to touch on gimmicks. I've mentioned it and sprinkled it here as I've been talking about the world and the story and all that. There is a lot of gimmicks in here, in particular like the airships doing different things, jumping over mountains and stuff like that. But status elements definitely have a key role in Final Fantasy III, in particular Minnie and Toad. You need these and need to use these efficiently to get through certain dungeons. Sometimes you turn Minnie, but you can't turn back, so you need to rely on certain jobs to help you through that part of the dungeon. Definitely need to get the thinking cap on when you're doing it. Obviously, when you use Toad, I think that the time when you need to use Toad, you can revert back, but usually at that part of the game you don't have enough MP to do that, so you need to take the right items with you, and that kind of ties into combat. And I'm going to start off with status elements, because I feel like Final Fantasy III has hit me with more status elements than Final Fantasy I and II combined. The amount of times I was poisoned, the amount of times I was blind, the amount of times I was turned to stone, and the amount of times I was confused was out of this world. I really suggest, if I have one tip for you guys, is to take those items with you. Take the antidotes, the gold needles, the eye drops. Take them with you because you're going to need them. Let's talk about the combat in a nutshell. It's much like Final Fantasy I and II, apart from the job system. It makes this a bit more of your own. Like we've stated previously, choose the team that suits you or really suits the situation. Like the Viking is a very underrated job. It's very good for tanking enemies and kind of bringing the attention your way. The Thief is also very good if you wanted to get through random encounters. Yes, I know the Pixel Remaster has the opportunity to click on and off encounters, but when you're hunting down certain monsters of the Bestiary and you're not coming across it, no encounters isn't going to help you because you're not going to encounter the enemy. But having a Thief on your team with Scram is going to help you. So definitely have a look through all of these abilities that the jobs offer, because they may help you in more ways than another. It's all about experimenting, and I think that's where the battle system shines for Final Fantasy III, because you are concentrating on the jobs you are taking to battle with you. The leveling system is back to basics here, so we don't have to worry about using a certain spell to level up a spell. We don't need to worry about using a certain weapon or getting hit or taking amount of turns. It is a simple leveling system, and it is much welcomed after Final Fantasy II if you are frustrated with that leveling system. But if you did like that leveling system, you have the Saga series which adapted that battle system, and that can be another video in itself. But we're back to basics here in Final Fantasy III. Let's talk about the Pixel Remaster for Final Fantasy III. Again, I don't want to go into detail with some of these things because these are going to be repeated throughout the 6 games in the collection. But we have the music player. Like I said, it's a banging soundtrack. You can switch between the 8-bits or the rearranged soundtrack. I suggest you just sit back and just listen to that soundtrack. We have the art gallery, so if you wanted to look at some concept art and some really cool drawings of these characters in these conceptual / final phases of development, it's all there to go. We have the Bestiary, and I think the Bestiary in the main menu, not in the game menu, is one of the best ways a Bestiary should be. You can scan around the world map looking at enemies. If there's a question mark there, of course you need to find that enemy in that area. You can click on a location and see all the enemies that are contained in that area, and not only that, you can then click onto an enemy and you can battle it with whatever arrangement of enemies it is. Sometimes you'll fight 2 of them, there might be 3 of them, and then another enemy. You can cycle through, and with your current party, with whatever save file you're using, you can battle along. So good practice for maybe speed runs, or if you want to start a new game with a new party and then go straight to the Bestiary using that save to then go against the final boss. It can be very interesting. It's there for you to experiment, and again, it's a great addition. Another great addition, like we touched on when we're talking about exploration and the gameplay, is the map system. We can have a look at all these kind of hidden passageways. Once we enter them, we can see how many items are in a map. We can see how many hidden items are in a map. We can have a look at all the locations that we visited, and overall the map system is an amazing quality of life with these Pixel Remasters. And of course we have boosts. It's very simple, back to basics with this one. We have random encounters on or off. We have the increase of gil and experience. Simple as that. Use it as you will. I definitely turned that gil up towards the end game because I wanted to buy some certain shurikens to help me along that final dungeon. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. But the options are there for you to kind of have an easier experience with Final Fantasy III or make it a harder experience. Let me know how you fared with the boosts in Final Fantasy III. I'm interested to hear, because some people like the boosts, some people don't like the boosts. Sometimes people switch between them wherever part of the game they're in. So I'm interested to see your thoughts on that. And that's everything in the Pixel Remaster in a nutshell, really. And again, great quality of life when it comes to the Pixel Remaster. So here we are. We are here with the trophies of Final Fantasy III, and Final Fantasy III again adopts the same nature as Final Fantasy I and II that we've done previously, and that is just adding to them. There's a few things that's related to the jobs, so you want to be leveling at least one job to 99, very easy. Leveling up your whole party to level 50, very easy. But again, this definitely has a lot of missables, and I mean a lot, to the point where I can't include them all in this video because that should be a video in itself. My advice is to kind of have a look at a guide, but if you want some quick tips just so you know what to look out for, I'll shout out a few places and a few items you might want to collect on your way. So there's a couple of locations that are only one-time visits, or they only remain in the world for a limited time. These places are as follows: the Living Woods, the Wrecked Ship, Hind Castle, and Doga's Grotto. These are places that you really want to look out for on the map, so while you're exploring that world, make sure that you're hitting these and getting it checked off your list. There's also 13 Chocobo Woods in this game. Yes, the Chocobos return, but some of these woods can be quite missable. All you got to do is look for that empty circle in a forested area, and there you have a Chocobo Woods to add to them, so make sure you collect them all. And there's also 2 items you really want to kind of be on the look for when you're at Saronia. Apart from that, there is a lot of missing enemies, there is a lot of missing items. If you don't want to follow a guide, just simply go into a place, explore everywhere, and if you're still missing something, refer to a guide. Same with the Bestiary. In each area you go to, do as much as you can. If you feel like you've got all the enemies in an area, just have a look to see if you've got them all. If not, you can go back and grab them. But again, there are a lot of missables. Too many for this video, but I'm hoping that these quick tips will put you on the right path to the Platinum Trophy. Apart from that, again, like I said, we have the usual suspects when it comes to the amount of battles, the amount of gil, and etc. when it comes to those trophies. So there we have it, Final Fantasy III. It has been completed, it has been done. It's time to move on to Final Fantasy IV, which I'm thoroughly excited to do because in terms of story, this is where Square cranked it up with the Final Fantasy franchise, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot to talk about and a lot for us to reminisce in the next episode of the Final Fantasy Platinum series. Thank you for watching. Again, it's been a pleasure to make these videos and interact with you in the comments. Leaving you with that, I'll catch you on the flip side.